It's the Deck Talking Devil back with you guys again for yet another episode of Biblical Nonsense. Before we get started on today's episode, go ahead, hit that like button, smash it a few times, share this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on those notifications. So, I want to show you a book as I usually do. Jesus Never Existed by Kenneth Humphreys. That's it. Pretty good book. Highly recommend you read it. Irregardless of whether or not you're a believer or you're an atheist, agnostic, whatever your position is, it's a pretty good book. All right, I think you'll enjoy it and will learn a lot from it, regardless of your worldview or where you stand on the issue of Jesus. So today I wanted to talk about a couple of things. First, let me say this. These puppies are coming to an end. That's right. You heard it here first. The Deck Talking Devil is giving up cigars. So this is my plan. I want to go from smoking. Typically, I smoke 2 cigars a day. 2 cigars a day. So I've already cut that down to 1 cigar a day. And by the end of this month, I want to be smoking 1 cigar a week. And by the end of October, I plan on being completely done with cigars. So wish me well. Let me know in the comment section if you've ever kicked the habit of smoking anything legal. Let me know in the comment section below what habits you've overcome and some of your tips and techniques for kicking that habit. And also, hats off to you guys who have kicked habits, because I know it's hard. It takes some determination, some will, and some real inner strength. For me, I don't think kicking cigars is going to be a big deal as far as the habit type thing, because with cigars you don't inhale, so it's not as addictive in my mind, or for me anyway. I think the thing that you miss about cigars is the experience. You know, that's the whole thing about smoking cigars. You don't inhale the smoke. It's really just the experience. It's something that you're doing while you're reading a good book, got a good glass of scotch, and you're sitting out smoking a cigar, and it's the experience of smelling the smoke, inspecting the cigar, cutting the cap, all of that kind of stuff is an experience. So that's the thing that you miss. And you also meet some pretty cool guys, pretty cool people when you're smoking cigars, going to the cigar lounges and things of that nature. So the experience would be more what I miss, not necessarily the cigars themselves. It's a very expensive habit, FYI. So if you're looking for something to get into recreational, if you're going to get into cigars, it is a pretty expensive habit. Typically, you'll pay, or I pay, typically $20 for a cigar, for 1 cigar. And depending on, I've smoked a cigar that was $100 before. I've smoked cigars that were $40-50 before. So it can get pretty expensive with cigars, and those are still cheap cigars if you want to know. I mean, there's cigars out there that's like $300-400 a stick. So yeah, cigars can be pretty expensive. So I'm kicking the habit, but I really want to know in the comment section from you if you've had to kick a habit, especially one similar to this, a smoking habit or addiction, and what were some of your strategies for kicking it? Did you just stop cold turkey, or did you have a method to the madness? Let me know. I want to hear from you guys. Okay, so tonight What I wanted to talk about is the Apostle Paul. If you follow me on Facebook, the Deck Talking Devil on Facebook, then you know I've posted some things recently about the Apostle Paul, and it was kind of spurred on by somebody engaging me and asking me the question, who was the most important convert to Christianity? And in their opinion, it was Constantine. And I disagreed. And they very strongly contested me on this. And they wanted to prove a point. And they did so unsuccessfully because it's not true. Now I know, let's say this at the outset, that saying the most important, who was the most important anything, is really subjective, right? At the end of the day, it boils down to your opinion, right? So I'm not denying that at all. So if you're not interested in anybody's opinion, you probably want to skip this video, because the whole premise is opinionated, in all honesty, right? To say who's the most important anything it's subjective. So yes, there is opinion involved here, but I think that my opinion is based on some pretty solid evidence and reasoning and logic. So, you know, if you're into those things, you want to keep listening. So why is it that I believe that Paul was a more important convert to Christianity than Constantine? Well, Constantine converted in like the year 322. All right, and Constantine converted when Christianity in the Roman Empire and the Roman Empire itself was really in sort of a decline. All right, Christianity, rather, not necessarily the Roman Empire itself, but even though there was some things going on, when you look at the tetrarchy that was formed, which is how Constantine's father became an emperor, because there was an emperor before him who decided that the Roman Empire was too big to be ruled by one ruler, and so he elected for a tetrarchy where you had two emperors, and each one of the emperors would have a Caesar. All right, the senior emperor that would be called Augustus, and the junior emperor would be called Caesar. All right, and so you had one in the east, one in the west, Augustus in the east and Augustus in the west, and then you had Caesar in the east and a Caesar in the west. Constantine's father was one of those Caesars, and when he passed, he chose Constantine to be his successor, which kind of stirred up an uproar. And another one of the four's sons said, hey, well, I should be emperor too. And this made it, well, it was really 5 emperors. And this kind of started civil war and everything like that. And while they fought it out, Constantine was fighting some other wars and stuff. And then he eventually sacked Rome. Actually, the pontoon boat was built, and the army from Rome came across and engaged Constantine in battle, and the leader of the Roman army sank in the river, and the rest was history. But that's when Constantine came in. Christianity within the Roman Empire, though, was at kind of like a plateau. Constantine did not accept Christianity in its infancy, and then you see this sporadic growth, all right, which is what a lot of people assume who haven't done the research, that, you know, Christianity was this meager faction on the outskirts of the Roman Empire. And then when Constantine converted, Christianity just blossomed and it took off and took over the Roman Empire. That's not what happened. All right, when you do the numbers, read a book. It's a book called it's by Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman. It's called The Triumph of Christianity. The Triumph of Christianity. All right, if you read that book, he deals with a lot of this information as well in his book on how he actually crunched the numbers. I think it's an appendix in the back of his book where he actually crunched the numbers and show you that in the beginning stages of Christianity, it started to grow exponentially by like 40% every year. But then it reached this phase to where it was not growing significantly at all. The growth had kind of plateaued. And that's when Constantine got in on it. It was not during those years of exponential growth of 40% annually, or 40%. It wasn't annual. It was 40% every decade. There's just no evidence to show, regardless of what Dan Brown would lead you to believe in the Da Vinci Code, that Constantine caused Christianity to take over the world. That is not what happened. The evidence does not support that conclusion. Do your research, people. So, I argue that Paul was by far the greatest convert to Christianity in the history of the religion. Paul converted 3 years after Jesus allegedly died. All right, Paul was a Jew. If you read the New Testament, Paul's own letters, he goes to great lengths trying to convey the point that he was a staunch, traditional, Orthodox Jew. All right, he believed and held to the standards and teachings of Judaism, which was why it is believed that Paul persecuted Christians to begin with. If you remember, go back and read Acts, go back and read the New Testament, that there was this guy named Paul of Tarsus, or Saul of Tarsus, who was persecuting Christians. All right. It doesn't really delve into why he was persecuting Christians. All right. But he tells us that he was persecuting Christians. He also gives us the insight to the fact that he was a devout Orthodox Jew. What did Jews believe? Well, the same thing that most Jews or many Jews believe today, that there is one God, and besides him, there is no other. This is scripture. This is Old Testament in the Hebrew Bible. All right. God says specifically that I am the Lord and I will share my glory with no one. I am the Lord, and besides me, there is no other. He goes, God is very clear in saying, no one is seated next to me. It is only me. He never tells us in the Old Testament about some Trinity, about his son that's ruling, co-ruler or joint ruler with him. This doesn't exist. And so when you had the Christians come on the scene and they started to teach that Jesus was in fact divine, that he was in fact God himself, the Jews saw this as heresy. This is blasphemy. And so you see Jesus himself arguing with the Pharisees, the Sadducees. He's arguing with the Jewish people. Because here you are trying to pass for God himself. Jesus makes the statement, when you have seen me, you have seen the Father. Me and the Father are one. All of these statements, before Abraham was, I am. All of these statements that Jesus makes is infuriating Jews, because they know that the scriptures and the covenant that they had with God was very explicit to say that he shares his glory with no one. He's the only God. There is no Trinity. There's no one besides him. And so when Paul, who by his own admission is a devout Orthodox Jew, hears Christians teaching that Jesus is God, he considers this heresy, sacrilege, blasphemy. And Paul persecutes Christians. So Paul eventually has his Damascus experience. By the way, it's one of the things I posted on Facebook. Paul's name was never changed. All right, contrary to popular belief in what's taught in Sunday schools all across America, that Paul was called Saul of Tarsus, and after he saw Jesus on the road to Damascus, his name was changed to Paul. That is not true. Saul is the rendering of his name in Hebrew or Aramaic. Paul is the rendering of his name in Greek. There never was a name change with Paul. All right, when you're saying Paul, you're just saying his name in Greek. When you say Saul, you're saying it in Hebrew or Aramaic. That's it. No name change. He has this experience on the Damascus Road, and he converts to Christianity, and he goes to great lengths to tell us about he was the one who was persecuting Christians and persecuting the church, and now he's been convicted by the very religion and beliefs that he was persecuting others for having. Paul rationalizes that if God honored the death of Jesus, if the death of Jesus counted as the sacrifice for mankind, that means that God had to have blessed Jesus' life, or Jesus himself. He had to have highly esteemed Jesus. And if salvation can come through someone who was killed on the cross, because the Old Testament tells us that cursed is he who hangs upon a tree. Jesus was crucified, hung on a tree. The Jewish Bible says anyone hung on a tree was cursed. But here you have the New Testament, Paul telling us that Jesus' death is actually the thing that paid the price, the ultimate redemption for mankind. In order for him to preach this message, he had to come up with a way to make the death of Jesus vindicated. And so Paul says that for Jews, anybody hanging on a tree was a curse. But because Jesus' death actually served as a sacrifice for mankind, God must have made an exception. He must have changed the rules somehow for Jesus, because his death actually didn't represent a curse, but it represented salvation for mankind. Therefore, salvation is not only offered to those who are Jewish, but it can be offered to those who are non-Jewish. This is Paul's teaching. Paul goes on to tell the apostles, hey, you guys go to the Jews, I'm going to the Gentiles. Paul, he deliberately tells people that you no longer have to be circumcised. Who is a Jew? One is not a Jew who is a Jew outwardly, but one is a Jew who is a Jew inwardly. And it's no longer the circumcision of the foreskin or the penis, but it's the circumcision of the heart. Paul now changes what it means to be the chosen, the elect of God. Had Paul not changed the theology, the doctrine, the Christology, the epistemology of Christianity, and what qualified you to receive the redemption of Jesus, Constantine, who was not a Jew, would never have been allowed in the religion. It was Paul and his teaching, his doctrine and manipulation of scripture, and his interpretation and invention of his Christology that opened the door for Gentiles to even be able to come in to Christianity, because the apostles were teaching that you had to be a Jew. You remember in the New Testament in Acts, there was this very open conflict between Peter and Paul about circumcision and all of this, because the apostles were teaching that you had to be a Jew and had to follow the law in order to accept and receive Jesus Christ. In order to be a Christian, Christianity was of the Jews. Paul was the one who went to the Gentiles, and Paul was the one who opposed the apostles and said that no, this is not only restricted to Jews, but it's also available to Gentiles. Had Paul not come with his doctrine, Constantine would never have been admitted into Christianity, and neither would you. So, it's my opinion that Paul was the most important convert to Christianity and not Constantine. What are your thoughts? Have you heard this information before? I'd love to know what you think about it. Let me know in the comment section below. And if you haven't already, hit that like button, subscribe, turn on those notifications, share this video. And as always, keep learning, my friend.